and all present over here. Be the woman you always wish to be, embracing the little girl you were. Fly high and touch the sky, but never dim your light. Good morning to one and all present over here. Respected management, speaker, principal, and faculties, and the participants. I heartily welcome you all to the webinar on Women's Day, that is Rights Over One in International and Domestic Regime. Today, we are having a esteemed speaker from the MEA who will be addressing us. I wish the participants, I really request the participants to mute your videos and audios till the end of the session, and please maintain the decorum. And if you have missed this video, or if you are unable to log in due to network issue, you need not worry, because we will be sharing this whole video in the YouTube session. Now, I request our assistant professor, now, I request our assistant professor, Mr. Vinay Ravishankar, Soundarya College of Law, to welcome the guest speaker.
To all the participants of this informative session. So it's a great pleasure for me to introduce our guest speaker, Ms. Jyoti Singh, who is going to talk to us about rights of women under domestic and international legal regime. Ms. Jyoti Singh graduated in law from University of Delhi in 2008. She subsequently went on to earn her LLM in 2011. She has been working with the Legal and Treaties Division of the Ministry of External Affairs as a consultant. She is also a visiting faculty in University of Delhi and Indian Society of International Law, apart from other law schools where she takes classes on various topics of international law, including refugees and diplomatic immunity. Ms. Jyoti Singh was also assigned various tasks which pertain to dealing with the digitalization of India's treaties through a treaty database, and also handling of arbitration cases, court cases, and matters pertaining to mutual legal assistance treaty, extradition, law of the sea, United Nations Commission on International Trade Law, amongst others. She has also participated in various interministerial negotiations and was also involved in vetting of treaties, agreements, MOUs of Government of India, and entered into with other countries, and was part of international commercial arbitration disputes, cases between Government of India and Vodafone, and Khaitan and Antrix versus Devdas case as well. Now over to the guest speaker, Ms. Jyoti Singh.
Very good morning to everyone. Today I'm going to speak not exactly on international law issues, but it's a combination, since the month of March is associated with International Women's Day. So Soundarya College of Law and we all together thought of having some session on rights of women. Why should we not have a session on rights of women? So that's how we came out with this topic, because I'm sure many of you are familiar with international law topics, and same thing being taught everywhere. So let us explore with this topic of rights of women in domestic and international arena. So domestic laws also, we have many acts and articles in Constitution of India which deals with rights of women. But we have in international law also, in international legal regime, we have something very important which many people are not knowing. And India also is on the footstep. It's in, I think it has been 30 years or 35 years. The convention came into force, but we are still in the niche stage. We are trying to implement, but so many things are still to be done. I mean, it needs to be done on the part of the Government of India when it comes to the implementation of international legal regime in India. So first of all, I'll start with domestic laws and what rights we women in India have under the domestic legal regime. So first we will see that what are the provisions which are there in the Constitution of India. I'm sure all of you would be familiar with Article 21 of Constitution of India, which deals with right to life, and that is a broad fundamental right. So it's a right which includes many other rights, and the judiciary is exploring the rights which we could not have thought about few years before. They are bringing all those rights under the arena of Article 21. So that's how we'll see that this is the first foremost article which deals with the rights of women. I mean, it takes into itself, it embraces into itself the rights which can be emanated from the Constitution. And first of that right is for a female, right to divorce or right to live free from violence, and the right to safe abortions. So these are the rights which are coming out of Article 21. And it includes within itself right to live with dignity. So it's very clear that right to divorce or right to live a life free from violence and the right to safe abortions, from where are they coming? From where they are coming out. So these rights are coming from the right to life with dignity. So Article 21 is the fundamental right for giving all the women a right to live with dignity. The next right which we will talk about is Article 14 of Constitution of India. You must all be knowing, because we have been reading Constitution of India from the time we think of doing LLB or law. So Article 14 guarantees equality before law or equal protection of law to all its citizens. So that also is a right which is very much correlated to the rights of women. How? And next right is Article 15.1 and Article 16.2, which expands the principle of equality to the women and marginalized section. 15.1 and 16.2 prohibits discrimination on the basis of religion, race, caste, sex, or place of birth. So this ensures that there is no discrimination between men and women, upper caste and lower caste, rich and poor, and all will be treated as equals before the law and will be provided equal protection of law. So how, if the Article 14 guarantees its citizens equality before law? So one may have this thing in mind, then Article 15.1 and 16.2 talks about no discrimination on the basis of religion, race, caste, sex, or place of birth. So that is somewhere promoting right to equality only. So we can see that Article 14 and Article 15.1 and 16.2 are correlated. The basic right that everyone should have equality before law or equal protection of law should be given to all its citizens is being carried forward by Article 15.1 and 16.2. But if you see Article 15.3.4 and 16.3.4 of Constitution of India, there you can see that Government of India is using those articles to make special provisions for securing the rights of the marginalized sections, including women, children, scheduled castes, and scheduled tribes. So we can see that it's a kind of discrimination which is being done to give special rights to women or other marginalized sections, including women. They are being over time, and they do not get that status in society which they ought to have given by the virtue of being born as a human being. So basic things they are missing. So to make them empowered or to give them some special support, government is doing discrimination. So this is called positive discrimination. This India has imbibed from the United States of America. If you see the laws of United States of America, you will see that they always promote positive discrimination to give special status to the marginalized sections. So India has imbibed this concept of positive discrimination from USA. Though if you see UK, United Kingdom, with the law which we follow, common law system, is not in favor of positive discrimination. they have an Equality Act which talks about equal status to everyone. So they can't have discrimination at all, whether it's positive or negative or any kind of discrimination. But India, Constitution of India has brought few principles, few articles in exception to Article 14, so that women in India could get few special rights, like to get an equal platform with their counterparts, with males in the society. And we can see that the few special enactments for women and children, such as the provisions for maintenance of women and children, protection against domestic and sexual violence, the Maternity Benefits Act, special protection for women under all labor laws, a special law to prevent sexual harassment at workplace, or reservations for women, scheduled caste or scheduled tribes for jobs and in elected bodies. These are the special enactments or laws which are coming because of Article 15.3.4 and 16.3.4. Because this is being done by the government using these articles of Constitution of India, and this is called positive discrimination. So if that thing comes into your mind, that why some special provision is being done for women, especially Maternity Benefits Act, or some act to deal with sexual harassment, and reservation in municipal corporation or panchayat. So all those things are emanating from this concept of positive discrimination, which government is using to give empowerment to women. We have few other articles in Constitution of India. Another one is it's a fundamental duty of all the citizens of India to renounce practices that are derogatory to the dignity of women. So if you understand about fundamental duty, that is the duty of all the citizens of India to renounce practices derogatory to the dignity of women. This is subjective. They have not defined what is derogatory and what is not a derogatory thing for women. But as a person of reasonable understanding, we may understand that what is derogatory, and you have to refrain from doing that in the dignity of women. That's a fundamental duty to all the citizens of India. Then we have Article 39 that requires the state to direct its policy towards securing for men and women equally the right to adequate means of livelihood. Then we have an equal pay for equal work for both men and women. So there was a time that there was a differentiation between the pay which was done by men and the payment to the women who did the same amount of work. So there was an article amended in the Constitution of India which brought this concept of equal pay for equal work for both men and women. And at the same time, they both have right to an adequate means of livelihood. So, and another provision we have in Constitution of India is directive principles that allows for provisions to be made by the state for securing just and human conditions of work and for maternity relief under Article 42. So a woman, when she has delivered a child, or when she is undergoing through that period of maternity, they need special treatment because they are undergoing through some very different phase, which is hard to explain in words. So to take care of that and to give just and human conditions of work and give maternity relief to females or women, we have Article 42, which is the directive principle of state policy in the Constitution of India. And we have, few other acts also in India in domestic legal regime that deal with the giving protection to females, empowering their status, or it gives a weapon in their hand so that they should not feel that they're a weaker gender or they're a weaker sex. So first is that Prevention of Sexual Harassment Act, which came in 2013. This was the first legislation of its kind, which specifically addresses the issue of workplace sexual harassment. Before that, this concept of workplace sexual harassment was there, but there was no specific act to deal with the issue of sexual harassment at workplace. So this act was kind of watershed movement, we can tell, in the history of women laws in India. So after that, it was enacted, the kind of protection a woman can avail of when she's being sexually harassed at workplace was put into an act, and that is known as Prevention of Sexual Harassment Act. The act was enacted by Ministry of Women and Child Development along with other stakeholders, and MEA was also, Ministry of External Affairs also was one of the stakeholders. So workplace sexual harassment is a form of gender discrimination which violates a women's fundamental right to equality and right to life guaranteed under Article 14, 15 and 21 of the Constitution of India. POSH Act had been enacted with the objective of preventing and protecting women against workplace sexual harassment and to address complaints of sexual harassment. So this is a kind of the government or the jurist thought of gender discrimination or sexual harassment is something which violates a woman's fundamental right to equality and right to life. And it's very right, because Article 14 gives right to equality. Article 15 and 21 also is equivalent to right to life and right to live with dignity. So if a woman is being sexually harassed at work, her right to live with dignity is being compromised somewhere. So this act comes as a respite to all women in India, all working women in India, and it gives them some eagerly awaited rights in the field of in relation to complaints of sexual harassment. Then we have Maternity Benefit Act, which was amended in 2017. And this is also, this is a very important amendment which was long pending by the government of India. And if you see in international scenario, the maternity benefit is being taken care of by the governments, on a larger extent. So following the international scenario, we also brought amendment in India, and the amendment was related to this thing, that paid maternity leave for women employees was with less than two surviving children was enhanced from 12 weeks to 26 weeks, which kind of doubled the leave which a woman can get when they have two surviving children. So this maternity leave was extended from 12 weeks to 26 weeks. And a maximum of 8 weeks could be taken before the expected delivery date and the remaining after childbirth. Women expecting their third child were also provided with the right to take 12 weeks of paid maternity leave, 6 weeks before childbirth and 6 after the birth of the child. This is also kind of a very important legislation.
Yes, ma'am, you can continue.
Yeah. So now we will see, if you, as a law student, you would be following the latest developments in last few years, what all has happened in the field of empowerment of women. So if you go back, you will see there was a landmark judgment in case of triple talaq. So in Muslims, there was the concept of instant talaq or triple talaq, which is known also as talaq-e-biddat. It's an Islamic practice that allowed men to divorce their wives immediately by uttering the word talaq 3 times. However, Supreme Court once again in its recent landmark judgment of Saira Bano versus Union of India, pronounced on August 22, 2017, set aside the practice of triple talaq. The bench declared triple talaq as unconstitutional by 3:2 majority. The judgment by the minority bench also further directed Government of India to lay a proper legislation in order to regularize the proceedings of divorce as per Shariat law. So in Islamic practice, this is a judgment which is a landmark judgment, because the females there, they always had this issue that the concept of triple talaq is affecting our marital status and our position in the society. So once the concept was done away with, they felt so empowered, and they started feeling that we have got a major bounce by the Supreme Court of India. Though the Government of India is still in the process of bringing a proper legislation to regularize the proceedings of divorce as per Shariat law, but as of now, this concept of triple talaq is denounced away with. Then you must be knowing about Sabrimala issue. Females could not, I mean, females of certain age only could go to the temple of Sabrimala, which is in Kerala. And the issue was brought before the bench of Supreme Court that why should women of certain age should not be permitted to go inside the temple. There is no written thing, there is no religious thing which stops a woman to enter, a woman of certain age, I must say, to enter into the temple. So in that judgment also, Supreme Court on September 28, 2019, delivered one of the most keenly awaited judgment in the Sabrimala case, and by a 4:1 majority, the Supreme Court permitted entry of women of all age groups to the Sabrimala temple, holding that devotion cannot be subjected to gender discrimination, which is very right. How can you subject the devotion to gender discrimination? However, irony was that lone woman in the bench who dissented was Justice Indu Malhotra, who has recently retired. And Deepak Mishra and Justice R.F. Nariman and Justice Khanwilkar and Justice Chanchur gave a favorable judgment in favor of women. So Sabrimala issue, triple talaq judgment, all these judgments by Supreme Court is showing the trend that even the judiciary is in favor of giving some hard impetus to the empowerment of women. And now we will see what are the special initiatives for women in India, apart from the legislations we have. So we have National Commission for Women, which is a statutory body which was established in 1992 with a specific mandate to study and monitor all matters relating to the Constitution of India, to the constitutional and legal safeguards provided for women, review the existing legislation to suggest amendments wherever necessary, etc. Then we have reservation for women in local self-government, and we have national plan of action for the girl child. Then we have national policy for the empowerment of women. And I must say, if anyone is interested in knowing more about the domestic rights, the rights of women in domestic legal regime, you must visit the website of National Commission for Women. They have given an elaborate idea of the rights of women and how can they avail, and who are the persons to approach, or which is the channel through which they can approach. You can spread the word also as well. Then we are coming to the international legal regime. I am sure that students would be knowing about domestic legal regime for sure. But when it comes to international legal regime, we are not much exposed to this international law on women empowerment, or what are the conventions which deal with the empowerment of women or protection of the rights of women. So till date, the most important international document which is against gender-based violence is the Convention on the Elimination of All Discriminations Against Women. That's in short called CEDAW, which came into force in 1979 by the United Nations. It was admitted that extensive discrimination against women continues to exist, and the first definition of what should be considered as discrimination was given in Article 1 as any distinction, exclusion, or restriction made on the basis of sex in the political, economic, social, cultural, civil, or any other field. So we may take that discrimination has been defined in Article 1 of CEDAW, which is, excuse me, which is distinction or restriction, which is made on the basis of sex, whether it's a field of political, economic, social, cultural, civil, or any other field. Any kind of distinction or restriction or inclusion which is based on the basis of sex can be termed as discrimination. So this is the definition which is a formal definition of discrimination and given in CEDAW. So the object and purpose of CEDAW convention is to create legally binding standards for women's human rights by highlighting civil and political as well as economic, social, and cultural rights, and placing them in a framework of the right to equality and non-discrimination based on sex. This convention, which is considered as Women's Bill of Rights, was long in the making, and the process of its adoption in 1979 was the result of a long struggle by women within and without the United Nations. This unique instrument melds together diverse human rights elements to provide a robust framework to address the complex nature of the inequality experienced by women. The message of international instruments such as the CEDAW, and we will just discuss about Beijing Declaration, which came in 1995, directs all state parties to take appropriate measures to prevent discrimination of all forms against women, besides taking steps to protect the honor and dignity of women, is loud and clear. So we can tell that majorly we have CEDAW and Beijing Declaration. But the difference between the two things is that CEDAW is a convention. And when you read international law, you will be getting this idea that when it's a convention and when it's a declaration, these two things are different. Convention has a legal binding effect, whereas when we have something known as declaration, that's a kind of declaration, that's a kind of principle, and that's not having that kind of legal binding effect. So what is very important in today's scenario is CEDAW. So CEDAW is the only most important international document which talks about discrimination against women in the field of politics, economics, social, cultural, civil, or any other field. Now, if you go further, we will see that it was only in 1993, with the Declaration on the Elimination of Violence Against Women, that specific forms of female violence became recognized by the international community. In this declaration, gender abuse has been defined as any act of gender-based violence that results in or is likely to result in physical, sexual, or psychological harm or suffering to women, including threats of such acts, coercion, or arbitrary deprivation of liberty, whether occurring in public or in private life. So before this declaration, most governments were inclined to consider violence as a private and domestic problem to be resolved at the state level. However, with the resolution 1994/45 of 4th March 1994, the UN decided to appoint the special reporter on violence against women with 3 main tasks, which was, first one was to collect information, second was to recommend measures, and the third one was to work closely with the support of reporters. Whether or not the turning point on the delicate issue of women's rights was CEDAW or that Declaration of Elimination of Violence Against Women, more than 50 countries ratified CEDAW after 1993, and the Republic of India was among them. So when the CEDAW came into force in 1979, but India became a party only in 1993. That is after the Declaration of Elimination of Violence Against Women came into force. So moreover, today we can see that CEDAW remains the only global legal convention on women's rights, and that has now assumed status in international customary law. I'm sure you would be knowing that what is an international customary law. Customary law is something which over a period of time state practices that, or it becomes part of the customs, that is known as international customary law. So it is so important that it is one of the sources of law in international law. And from that, customary law is something from which you cannot derogate at all. It is so important. So over a period of time, we see that CEDAW has attained the status of customary law, which is the kind of thing that you cannot have any derogation from the CEDAW convention, which if the state is a party, it's okay. Even if it's not a party, it has become a customary law, so you have to follow that in good faith. You cannot deviate from that. Now we will see that what is the situation of India vis-a-vis CEDAW. Where do we stand as a country when it comes to the implementation of Convention of Elimination of all kinds of violence against women? So India's ratification of CEDAW was not unequivocal and came with declarations and reservation. If you want to know what is a declaration and reservation, I would suggest all of you, if you have interest in international law, please go through Vienna Convention on Treaties. That's VCLT, and you will get everything regarding treaty or declaration or reservation in that VCLT, Vienna Convention on Law of Treaties. So India also was not unequivocal. We came out with declaration and reservation. So reservation and declaration is something which is, in short, I'll explain that we are accepting, we are becoming party to the convention, but there may be some provisions which we are not comfortable to deal with. So we will have reservation or declaration vis-a-vis that particular article. Though we may not have any issue with whole of the convention, but there may be one or two provisions or articles where we may not be, government may not be comfortable becoming, addressing those issues when it comes to our country. So we will have reservation with particular to that article, and rest of the articles on conventions we are fine. So as a result, India made a declaration with regard to Article 5A, which stated that state parties shall take all appropriate measures to modify the social and cultural patterns of conduct of men and women with a view to achieving the elimination of prejudices and customary and all other practices which are based on the idea of the inferiority or the superiority of either of the sexes, or on stereotyped roles of men and women. And Article 16(1), which says that state parties shall take all appropriate measures to eliminate discrimination against women in all matters relating to marriage and family relations. Then Government of India declared that it shall abide by and ensure these provisions in conformity with its policy of non-interference in the personal affairs of any community without its initiative and consent. So Government of India was very clear that we will only adopt those articles or those part of the conventions which will not be interfering in the personal affairs of any community in India, because India is a diverse country. So many people from different community, different religions, we all stay together. So once we give an access to the convention, or when we accede to the convention and we become equivocally, we become a party without any reservation, so they might create a tussle with the domestic issues of personal affairs when it comes to a particular community. So Government of India was not ready on that. So with this policy of non-interference in personal affairs of any community, Government of India was ready to become a party. Similarly, with regards to Article 16(1), which eliminates any legal effect of child marriage, India declared that though in principle it fully supports the principle of compulsory registration of marriage, it is not practical in a vast country like India with its variety of customs, religions, and level of literacy. So we came out with this with reservation, particularly with Article 16(2), which eliminates any legal effect of child marriage. But we supported the idea of restraining child marriage completely. But this compulsory registration of marriage, we were little apprehensive, because we have personal laws and we have customs and religions and different type of literacy. Though we are in favor of compulsory registration, but at the same time, it would be difficult to implement the compulsory registration of marriages in this whole country, in our country, India. Next was finally India stated that it does not consider itself bound by Article 29(1), which allowed state parties, whether involved in a dispute concerning the interpretation or application of the convention, to refer to the International Court of Justice if necessary. This article is very important, because this reservation we have with many other conventions, and particularly with this special provision. Whether involved in a dispute concerning interpretation or application of the convention, we don't want to go to International Court of Justice, because then it will open the can of worms, and every third state or every other state will be using this clause to go to International Court of Justice for all the minor and trivial issues. So India as a country doesn't want that. We have this reservation with many other conventions, other international conventions. We don't want to go every other time. The third country cannot take India always to International Court of Justice. We are not comfortable with that, especially when it comes to the interpretation or application of the convention, because it's subjective. You may interpret the convention according to your laws. We may interpret the convention according to our law. So there is no uniformity. So how can I give you the liberty to take, when it comes to a dispute regarding the interpretation, you can abruptly take the other country to International Court of Justice. So we have a hard, strict reservation there when it comes to Article 29(1). Then we have optional protocol to CEDAW. The CEDAW Convention provides a unique opportunity to fundamentally enhance the dynamics of international human rights mechanisms through the provision of the optional protocol to CEDAW, which came into force in 2000. It functions as a separate treaty that is open to ratification only by those states that are already parties to CEDAW. So the state parties who have already signed CEDAW can only be a party of optional protocol to CEDAW. The optional protocol introduces two procedures: a communication procedure whereby individuals or groups of individuals may submit claims of violations of rights to the committee, and an inquiry procedure whereby the committee may initiate inquiries into situations of grave or systematic violation of rights. It provides an incentive for states to provide more effective local remedies and to eliminate discriminatory laws and practices. Moreover, it is a major tool for women, as communications concerning violations of any of the rights set forth in the convention may be submitted on behalf of an individual or group of individuals. However, India is not a party to the protocol. We have become a party to the convention, but we are not becoming a party to the protocol. And we have few other important international conventions which also play a great role when it comes to the rights of women. And we have those conventions are International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. Then we have Beijing Platform for Action. Then we have United Nations Declaration on Violence Against Women. So these are four primary conventions or declarations that give a vast right to women. They recognize the kind of human rights we women have, and they have played a very great role in the empowerment of rights of women. Now we will discuss about Beijing Declaration. So Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, adopted at the UN's 4th World Conference on Women. United Nations held 4 conferences when it came to women. So this was the 4th World Conference, which was held in China in Beijing in 1995, at which Ireland participated, is an agenda for women's empowerment. It aims at removing all the kind of obstacles to women's active participation in all spheres of public and private life through ensuring women a full and equal share in economic, social, cultural, and political decision making. So far, 189 members have signed this declaration. But as I told the students earlier, there is a difference between declaration and convention. Though 189 countries have signed this, but the legal efficacy or the legal effect of the declaration is very less. It gives the discrimination to the member parties who are signing it. So there is no legal enforcement that you have to follow or you have to act in a certain manner. It's a very flexible kind of document. So in 1995, 189 members signed that. As of now, there are 192 signatories, and 25-year review of the declaration at the meeting of the UN's Commission on the Status of Women was held in March 2020. And the declaration identified 12 critical areas of concern. The areas are women and the environment, women in power and decision making, the girl child, women and the economy, women and poverty, violence against women, human rights of women, education and training of women, institutional mechanisms for the advancement of women, women and health, women and the media, women and armed conflict. So we can see that all the important areas which we can think about and which are the primary areas in the decision making, they have in Beijing Declaration, they have correlated everything with women. So women and armed conflict, women in media, women in health. So all those areas have been discussed with special reference to women, role of women. A Beijing platform has been also hailed by the Center for Reproductive Rights as the most comprehensive articulation of international commitment related to women's human rights. It places a special emphasis on reproductive rights through its legislation regarding family planning, which states that it is the right of all women to be informed and to have access to safe, effective, affordable, and acceptable methods of family planning of their choice, as well as methods of their choice for regulation of fertility, which are not against the law. So if you see, this is a kind of very revolutionary thing, which the Declaration of Beijing Platform brought into picture, which was being talked about in this platform for action was reproductive rights of women, which people are very reluctant to talk about. So this is a kind of revolutionary declaration, we must say. 4 other women conferences were held in Mexico City in 1975, in Copenhagen in 1980, in Nairobi in 1985, and Beijing 1995, which came out with Beijing Declaration. Then the Beijing conference was followed by a series of 5-year reviews. Every 5 years, the United Nations reviews the implementation of Beijing Declaration. And apart from that, we have Beijing plus 10 in 2005 and Beijing plus 25 in 2020. So all these special events are organized to see the compliance or implementation of Beijing Declaration. So how far is it being implemented, and how far is it the declaration or the principles encouraged by the declaration are being actually implemented and followed by the different government of different countries. Coming to special, we have a special commission on the status of women in United Nations, which is a principal global intergovernmental body exclusively dedicated to the promotion of gender equality and the empowerment of women. A functional commission of ECOSOC, that is Economic and Social Council. It was established by ECOSOC in June 1946. This commission, we can say, that is very instrumental in promoting women's rights, documenting the reality of women's lives throughout the world, and shaping global standards on gender equality and the empowerment of women. And the Convention of Elimination on All Kind of Violence Against Women, that is CEDAW, was a brainchild of Commission on Status of Women only. The members and the people working in the Commission on Status of Women worked so hard to bring a global document to address the issues of women, and that's how CEDAW came into picture. So the credit should be given to the Commission on the Status of Women of United Nations. Then it's very important to see how is CEDAW being taken in the domestic law of India by the judiciary. So to which extent government, though we are a party to the CEDAW, and government is trying its best to bring things into the domestic law, I mean absorbing things from international legislation into the domestic legislation, but to what extent the judiciary is open to see the implementation of the international legal regime or international convention. So there are 3 judgments I have quoted. The first one is Geeta Hariharan versus Reserve Bank of India. It's a judgment of Supreme Court. And in this case, the court relied upon the Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, that is CEDAW, and Beijing Declaration. Both of the declaration and convention was being relied on by the Supreme Court in this particular case. This was a case which came in 1999. So we can see that the Beijing Declaration it came in 1995. And in 1999, Supreme Court is referring to Beijing Declaration. So the judges were so aware of the happenings when it regards to the empowerment of women, what is happening globally or what is happening in international arena. So in this judgment, the court directed all state parties to take appropriate measures to prevent discrimination of all forms against women. In this judgment is quite clear. It was held by the court that the domestic courts are under an obligation to give due regard to the international conventions and norms for construing domestic laws when there is no inconsistency between them. So when there is inconsistency, then the courts may restrain. But when there is no inconsistency, that CEDAW and Beijing Declaration, India was a party with certain reservation or declaration. So there was no inconsistency per se. So the Supreme Court held that the domestic courts in India are under an obligation to give due regard to the international conventions. So we have to see what is happening internationally for the empowerment of women, and we have to act taking into account the international conventions also. We cannot just rely on the domestic convention, domestic laws. We have to see the conventions which have been drafted at the international level. So this was the first case. Second was Madhu Kishwar and others versus State of Bihar and others. The court, while upholding the fundamental right of the tribal women to the right to livelihood, held that state was under an obligation to enforce the provisions of the Vienna Convention on the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, that is CEDAW, which provided that discrimination against women violated the principles of equality of rights and respect for human dignity. So here also the convention, that is CEDAW, was taken into account by the court, and it was held that we have to enforce the provisions of CEDAW while giving the judgment, while tackling with the domestic law issues. We have to enforce the provisions of CEDAW also, and we have to see that there is no discrimination against women, and there should be no violation to the principle of equality of rights and respect for human dignity. The final case which I'll discuss today is Vishakha and others versus State of Rajasthan and others. I'm sure as a law student, you all would be knowing about this landmark case, which was regarding sexual harassment at work. And the writ petition was filed for the enforcement of the fundamental rights of working women under Articles 14, 19, and 21 of Constitution of India, with the aim of finding suitable methods for realization of the true concept of gender equality and preventing sexual harassment of working women in all workplaces through judicial process to fill the vacuum in existing legislation. This court, while framing the guidelines and norms to be observed by the employers in workplaces to ensure the prevention of sexual harassment of women, inter alia, relied on the provisions of the CEDAW for construing the nature and ambit of constitutional guarantee of gender equality in our constitution. So this was one of the first cases where CEDAW was fully relied upon. The Honorable Supreme Court of India came out with certain guidelines regarding related to sexual harassment at work when it comes to females. So this was, the CEDAW was taken into account, and the judges heavily relied on the various articles of the convention, and it was taken very inclusively in our domestic laws, and that's how the principles were laid down by the Supreme Court of India in the case of Vishakha and others versus State of Rajasthan. So this was the first case we can say that the judiciary exposed itself to the happenings of outside India, what is happening outside India, what is happening at the international level, what different countries are thinking about, and how are they making things to empower their women and to stop the prohibition or gender discrimination or sexual harassment or any other kind of discrimination which women face during their whole life. So I think with this, I will just stop, and I'm thinking that I have almost covered all the issues, what we have in domestic law and what we have in international arena, and the judgments also I have covered. So I think this is sufficient for today. So I'll end this. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for this wonderful session. And it was very informative for us to know that how India has been actively involved in the international arena and how we have also tried to use the international conventions for our women's rights. I thank one and all who have taken their time and participated in this in this webinar. And also, there is a feedback link that has been put in the chat box. Please do drop in your feedback, and I hope you people have had good time with us. Thank you, one and all. Thank you.